xAI built the single largest AI training cluster on the planet, a gigawatt and a half of compute, a facility called Colossus 2 that draws more power than some cities. And as of today, the model it was built to train, Grok 5, still is not here. It was promised for the end of last year, then the first quarter of this year, then the second quarter. All of those windows have come and gone. So I want to talk about what that delay actually means, because the easy take is to laugh at a missed deadline, and the easy take is wrong. The real story here is one of the most important lessons in modern AI, and almost nobody is saying it out loud. More compute does not buy you a better model on a schedule. Let me lay out what actually happened, because the timeline itself tells the story. Grok 5 was originally aimed at late 2025. Then Elon Musk pushed it to the first quarter of 2026, explicitly saying they had decided to scale the model up significantly before release. That first quarter window passed with nothing. xAI then pointed at the second quarter, roughly May to June. That window has now effectively closed, and there is still no Grok 5. Meanwhile, Colossus 2 came online in January as the first gigawatt-scale training cluster in the world and crossed the 1.5 gigawatt mark in the spring. So the infrastructure is real, it is running, it is enormous. And the model is still, by the company's own last official word, in training. Sit with that combination for a second, because it is the whole point. Here is the bet xAI made, and it is worth understanding clearly before I criticize it. Their thesis, more than any other lab, has been that scale is the answer. Build the biggest cluster, pour in the most compute, and the capabilities will follow. There is real intellectual foundation for that. The scaling laws of the last several years genuinely showed that bigger models trained on more data with more compute got predictably better. xAI looked at that curve and did something audacious. They went out and built the largest concentration of training power anyone has ever assembled on a timeline that would make most infrastructure teams faint. If raw scale were the whole game, Grok 5 should be a monster, and it should have shipped on time. So why hasn't it? Because scale is necessary, but it is nowhere near sufficient. And this is the part the marketing never captures. Training a frontier model is not like pouring more water into a bigger bucket. As you scale up, everything gets harder in ways that do not shrink with more GPUs. Training runs at this size can go unstable, where the loss suddenly spikes and you lose days or weeks of progress and have to roll back and diagnose why. The data pipeline has to be curated at a scale where quality problems you could ignore before now poison the whole run. And critically, the payoff curve is bending. The scaling laws never promise linear returns. They promise diminishing ones. Each new order of magnitude of compute buys you a smaller and smaller improvement in capability, which means the closer you push to the frontier, the more compute and the more careful engineering it takes to move the needle at all. A gigawatt and a half of hardware does not exempt you from that. If anything, it makes the coordination problem worse. The prediction markets, for what they are worth, have been quietly skeptical this whole time. As the second quarter wore on with no release, traders were pricing Grok 5 shipping on schedule well below a coin flip, at some points down around 1 in 3 or lower. Now, prediction markets are not oracles, but they are a decent aggregate of how much the informed crowd believes a promise, and the crowd clearly stopped believing the timeline months ago. That gap between what xAI announced and what the market expected is itself information. It tells you that repeated confident deadlines from this space should be treated as aspirations, not commitments. We have all been trained to hear a date and mentally file it as fact. Stop doing that. A deadline announced on social media is a hope with a timestamp attached, nothing more. And this industry has taught us that lesson release after release after release. Now let me flip this around, because I do not actually think a delay is the scandal here. I think shipping late is the correct decision, and I would be far more worried if they had shipped on time. A frontier model that goes out the door broken, unstable, or embarrassingly behind the competition does lasting damage, both to users and to the brand. Taking the extra months to get a giant model right is the responsible engineering call, not the shameful one. The problem is not that Grok 5 is late. The problem is the expectation setting that made it feel late in the first place. When you publicly commit to quarter after quarter and miss each one, You convert good engineering discipline into the appearance of failure. The delay is fine. The promising was the mistake. Let me put this in the bigger pattern, because xAI is not alone. They are just the most extreme example. The entire industry is in the middle of a compute arms race, where the size of your cluster has become a marketing number in its own right. Gigawatts are the new benchmark, and there is a seductive story underneath it that intelligence is basically a function of how much power you can point at the problem. Colossus 2 is the purest expression of that faith, but the Grok 5 saga is a live test of it, playing out in real time. If the biggest cluster on Earth still cannot produce its flagship model on any of 3 announced timelines, then the simple story, just add compute, is incomplete at best. The reality is messier. Compute is one ingredient. Data quality, training stability, algorithmic efficiency, and plain engineering craft are the others, and you cannot buy those by the gigawatt. So what am I actually watching for when Grok 5 finally does land? 2 things, and neither of them is the parameter count. First, is it actually meaningfully better than the current frontier, or is it merely competitive? Because if you spend that much compute and that much time, and you land roughly where everyone else already is, that is not a triumph of scale. That is evidence of diminishing returns arriving right on schedule. Second, how stable and reliable is it in real use, not on a launch day benchmark? A model that scores well and then behaves erratically in production is a very expensive disappointment. Those 2 questions will tell you far more about whether the gigawatt bet paid off than any headline number xAI chooses to lead with. Let me put the sheer scale of this in perspective, because the numbers have gotten so large they stop meaning anything. A gigawatt and a half is not a big server room. It is the output of a large nuclear reactor. xAI built in months a computing facility that consumes the power of a small city, and they did it faster than most companies can build an office. That is a genuinely staggering feat of logistics and capital, and I do not want to wave it away. But here is the trap. The speed and size of that build creates an overwhelming expectation that the model must be equally staggering and equally fast. The building is a promise made in concrete and copper. And when the physical infrastructure races ahead of the actual training, you get exactly this situation, where the most impressive machine in the industry sits there humming, drawing enough electricity to light a metropolis, while the thing it was built to produce is still not done. The hardware is a sunk cost the moment it powers on. The capability is not. Go one level deeper into the engineering, and it gets even clearer why this is hard. Grok 5 is reportedly a genuinely enormous model, in the range of several trillion to as much as 10 trillion parameters. At that size, you are almost certainly dealing with a mixture of experts' architecture, where different parts of the model specialize, and a router decides which parts to activate. That is efficient, but it is also fiendishly finicky to train. The routing can collapse, where the model lazily funnels everything to a few experts and wastes the rest. Balancing that across a cluster this size is a research problem, not a settled recipe. Add in the brutal economics of checkpointing, where you constantly have to save the state of a model this large so a hardware failure does not erase weeks of work. And the fact that at 10,000 plus accelerators, something is always failing and you start to see it. Training at this scale is less like running a program and more like keeping a fragile, city-sized organism alive long enough to finish learning. More compute does not simplify that. It multiplies the number of things that can go wrong. Now let me steelman the optimist, because there is a real case on the other side. A long, painful delay can also be the signature of genuine ambition. Maybe xAI is not stuck. Maybe they are deliberately running an unusually long training run, or folding in a new architecture, or training on far more data because they have decided a true leap is worth the wait. If that is what is happening, Grok 5 could land and actually leapfrog the field, and all of this hand-wringing about deadlines will look silly in hindsight. I take that possibility seriously, but notice the asymmetry. If they pull it off, we get one great model in a vindicated bet. If they do not, we get a merely competitive model that costs more compute and more time than anyone else spent, which is the textbook definition of diminishing returns. The delay is consistent with both stories, and anyone who tells you with certainty which one it is guessing. I am simply pointing out that the burden of proof sits with the bigger claim. So here is my verdict. The Grok 5 delay is not a joke, and it is not a disaster. It is a data point, and it is a genuinely important one. It is the clearest evidence yet that we have entered the era of diminishing returns at the frontier, where even the largest concentration of compute ever assembled cannot reliably deliver a next-generation model on a promised date. That does not mean scale is dead or that Grok 5 will be bad. It may well be excellent when it arrives. But it does mean the simple faith that you can brute force your way to better AI just by building a bigger power plant is being quietly disproven by the very company that believes in it most. Judge Grok 5 by what it can do when it ships, not by the size of the machine that made it or the number of deadlines it broke on the way. Compute is a tool. It was never the whole answer. And the emptiest, most powerful building in the industry is currently proving it. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribe, because I do this every single day. I take the biggest thing that happened in AI, and I tell you which part is real and which part is a pitch. I will see you in the next one.